My name is Harrison. I'm 63 years old. And last Tuesday, my wife of 40 years canceled my credit card, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Learn to live without my money." She smiled when she said it, like she'd already won. What Iris didn't know, what she couldn't have known, is that 7 months before that moment, I had quietly made one phone call that changed everything. One conversation with someone she'd never think to ask about. One decision made in the dark, in grief, in the kind of silence that only a man who feels invisible in his own home truly understands. She thought she was pulling the floor out from under me. She was actually just opening the door I'd already built. The next morning, her phone rang, and the look on her face, 40 years of marriage. And I'd never seen her look like that before. I'm not here to make her the villain. I'm not here to celebrate. I'm here because someone needs to hear what happens when a quiet man finally decides he's done being invisible. This is my story. And it starts the night everything fell apart, or maybe the night everything finally began. Before this story goes any further, if you're already feeling something, that means this is for you. Subscribe right now and hit that bell icon so you don't miss a single chapter. This story has a twist that nobody sees coming, and I promise you'll want to be here when it lands. Like this video to help Harrison's story reach someone who needs it today. Drop a comment below. Just say, "I'm with Harrison," so I know you're in. Let's go. I want to tell you something before I get into the details. I am not a dramatic man. Never have been. 32 years in a classroom teaching literature to teenagers who mostly didn't want to be there. You learn fast that the quietest moments carry the most weight. I believed that. I built my life around that idea. So when my card declined at the grocery store on a random Wednesday afternoon, I didn't make a scene. I didn't raise my voice, I simply stood there, a 63-year-old man in a green jacket holding a bag of coffee and a loaf of sourdough bread, while a girl young enough to be my granddaughter looked at me with the specific, terrible pity that only a stranger can give you. "Would you like to try a different card, sir?" I didn't have a different card. I paid for the coffee in cash, and thank God I had a crumpled 20 in my wallet, left the bread on the counter, and walked out to my car. I sat there for a minute just breathing. Then I called the number on the back of the card. The automated voice confirmed what I already knew in my gut. This account was closed by the primary holder this morning. Primary holder. That's what 40 years becomes when the warmth runs out. Legal language. Primary holder. Co-signer. Former. I drove home. Iris was at the kitchen table. She had her chamomile tea, the one she drinks every afternoon in the blue mug our daughter gave her for Christmas 3 years ago. She didn't look up when I came in. That was deliberate. I know her well enough to know that. "I did it," she said. Calm, measured, like she was telling me she'd taken the recycling out. "The card's canceled, Harrison. The joint account's been restructured. I think it's time you learn what it feels like to contribute nothing and receive nothing in return." I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen. 40 years. We met when I was 23 and she was 21. I remember the exact bench in the park where I first made her laugh, really laugh, the kind that bends you forward. I remember the hospital room where our daughter was born, how Iris squeezed my hand so hard I thought the bones might rearrange themselves, and how she looked at me after, completely exhausted, completely radiant, like I was the only solid thing in the room. I thought about all of that standing in the doorway. Then I nodded, just once, and I went upstairs. I heard her exhale behind me, relief, maybe, or disappointment that I hadn't reacted the way she expected. Iris has always been a woman who anticipates reactions. She reads the room before she walks into it. It used to be one of the things I admired most about her. I sat on the edge of our bed, my side, the left side, the side closest to the window, and I placed both hands flat on my knees. Old habit from the classroom. Something I did when I needed to think without panicking. Here is what Iris did not know. Here is what nobody knew. 7 months before that afternoon, I had sat in this exact spot after an evening that broke something open in me, and something I'd been pressing shut for years. I'd overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear, not an argument, something quieter than that, and somehow worse. I'd heard Iris on the phone with Gabriel, our neighbor from the house with the red shutters, and she'd said, in the casual, tired voice of someone discussing logistics, "I'm just waiting for the right moment to make the move. I've already talked to someone." I didn't confront her. I didn't ask. I went to the car and sat in the driveway for 2 hours. And then I made a decision. Not out of anger. I want to be clear about that. Not even out of strategy, not at first. It came from something older and sadder than anger. It came from a man who realized that the person who was supposed to see him had stopped looking a long time ago, and that if he didn't start seeing himself, nobody would. I called my former student the next morning, Harper. 34 years old, sharp as anyone I've ever known, built a financial advising practice from nothing by the time she was 30. She'd sent me a card when I retired, handwritten, 3 paragraphs about how my class changed the way she read the world. I hadn't spoken to her in 4 years. She picked up on the second ring. "Mr. H," she said, "is everything okay?" "Not entirely," I told her. "But I think it's going to be." That phone call lasted 47 minutes. By the end of it, I had the beginning of a plan, quiet, legal, unhurried, the kind of plan that a man builds not to destroy something, but to make sure he survives it. Iris canceled my card thinking she was ending something. She had no idea she was simply the last thing I'd been waiting for. Let me take you back 7 months, because revenge, if you want to call it that, and I'm still not sure I do, doesn't begin with action. It begins with grief. It begins with a man sitting in a parked car at 9 p.m., listening to the engine cool, unable to go inside his own home. That night, after I heard Iris on the phone with Gabriel, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark listening to her breathe beside me, slow, steady, unbothered, and I thought about my brother Finn. Finn had died 3 years earlier, lung cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to funeral. He was 61. He left me a small inheritance, not life-changing money, but real money, thoughtful money, the kind Finn always was. Iris knew about the inheritance. What she didn't know, because she never asked and I never volunteered, was what I'd done with it. She assumed I'd donated most of it. I had mentioned once that Finn would have wanted some of it to go towards something meaningful. She nodded and moved on. Iris moves on quickly. It's efficient. It's also, I've come to understand, a kind of erasure. I hadn't donated it. I'd held onto it quietly in a personal savings account I opened at a different bank, not out of secrecy at the time, just out of a need to keep something of Finn separate from the shared machinery of our household. Something that was just mine and his. I wasn't hiding it. I was grieving. But then came that night in the driveway, and grief became something else. The morning after, I called Harper. I told her where I stood financially, which wasn't weak, just underestimated. I had Finn's inheritance sitting untouched for 2 years, gaining modest interest. I had my teacher's pension, modest but consistent. I had 40 years of quiet, careful living that had cost me visibility, but preserved resources that Iris had stopped thinking about because she'd stopped thinking about me. Harper listened to everything without interrupting. That was always her way, even at 17 in the back row of my English class. She listened like she was building something from your words. "Mr. H," she said when I finished, "you're not starting from zero. You're starting from somewhere she doesn't know to look." That was the sentence that changed the direction of my life. Over the following weeks, Harper introduced me to Juniper, a family and financial attorney in her late 40s, precise in a way that felt like protection. Juniper had handled exactly this kind of case before. A spouse, usually the quieter one, usually the one assumed to be financially dependent, who turned out to have more ground to stand on than anyone realized. She wasn't cold about it. She was simply clear. I needed clear. "You want to protect yourself," Juniper said at our first meeting. "Not punish, protect. Let's build from there." With Harper's guidance and Juniper's framework, we established an LLC, a small educational consulting firm built around the one thing I actually knew better than anyone: curriculum. 40 years in the classroom. Relationships with school administrators, library boards, district coordinators who trusted my judgment. Harper reached out to contacts. Juniper handled the legal structure. I wrote the proposals. Within 4 months, we had 3 paying contracts, small but real. A rural school district in Ohio reviewing their reading curriculum, a library foundation building a literacy program, a nonprofit developing educator training resources, nothing flashy, nothing that would surface in a casual conversation or a joint tax filing. I wasn't hiding it to be cruel. I was building it to survive. And here is the thing about Iris that I have to be honest about. We get seen because I told you this wasn't about making her the villain, and I meant it. She never asked. In 7 months of me waking up early, taking calls in the car, making quiet trips to meet Harper and Juniper, she never once asked what I was doing with my time. Not once. There's a particular kind of loneliness in being invisible to someone who once saw everything about you. Gabriel had been the one she talked to instead. Gabriel, 58, recently divorced, lived alone in the house with the red shutters, always available for a cup of coffee and a conversation. I don't believe anything inappropriate happened between them. I want to be clear about that. What I believe is simpler and sadder. Iris had found someone who listened, and I had become someone she no longer considered worth listening to. So she planned her move, and I built mine. By the time she canceled that credit card, the LLC had a real balance. Harper was already negotiating a 4th contract. Juniper had prepared documents for every possible scenario, and I, the furniture, the dependent, the man who supposedly contributed nothing, had become the sole owner of something real. The next morning, Iris's phone would ring, and everything she assumed about power in this marriage would shift in the space of one conversation. She just didn't know it yet. Neither, honestly, did I know exactly how I'd feel when it happened. I have replayed that morning so many times in my mind that it has started to feel like a film I've watched too often, familiar in every detail, still somehow surprising every time. I was up before Iris. That wasn't unusual. I've always been an early riser, old teacher habit, the kind that doesn't leave you even after the classroom does. I made coffee, 2 cups out of muscle memory, then stood at the kitchen counter looking at the 2nd cup and thinking about how long I'd been doing things like that, making 2 cups, setting 2 plates, carrying the quiet weight of a partnership that had slowly, without ceremony, become a performance. I left her cup on the counter and took mine to the table. I was eating toast when her phone rang. Iris came downstairs in her robe, hair still loose, moving with the unhurried confidence of a woman who believes the morning belongs to her. She picked up the phone from the counter without looking at the screen. She never looks at the screen first, another small habit I know better than she realizes. Hello? I watched her face. At first it was neutral. Then something shifted, a small tightening around the eyes, the kind most people would miss. I didn't miss it. 40 years of reading that face had made me fluent in its smallest movements. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "Which account?" She turned slightly away from me. Another habit, she angles her body away when she wants privacy in a shared room. I took a sip of coffee and looked out the window at the backyard, giving her the performance of indifference while I heard everything. The call was from the bank, not the joint bank. A different institution entirely, one whose name Iris had never heard connected to me. They were calling to confirm the successful transition of the business account's primary authorization. Routine courtesy call, warm, professional, completely devastating to every assumption Iris had built her plan on. "What business account?" she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The representative, politely and thoroughly, explained that the account, belonging to the LLC registered 7 months prior, had completed its first quarter reporting and that the primary account holder had requested a courtesy notification be sent to this secondary contact number on file. Secondary contact? That's what she was in this particular equation. She hung up without saying goodbye to the representative. She stood at the counter with her back to me for a long moment, long enough that the refrigerator hum became the loudest thing in the room. Then she turned around. I want to describe her expression carefully because I've thought about it often and I still find it complex. It wasn't just shock. It was the specific, unsteady look of someone who has just realized that the map they were using doesn't match the actual terrain. Everything she had assumed about who I was, what I had, what I was capable of, had just been quietly, legally, completely rearranged. I didn't smile. I want to be clear about that. There was no satisfaction on my face, or if there was, I held it down because this wasn't a moment I wanted to perform. This was a moment I had prepared for, yes. But preparation and celebration are very different things. "Harrison," she said, just my name, nothing attached to it. "Morning," I said. "Coffee's on the counter." She didn't touch it. She sat down across from me slowly, like the chair might not hold. And I watched Iris, my wife of 40 years, the woman in the blue mug Christmas photo, the woman from the park bench, the woman who had looked at me in that delivery room like I was the only solid thing, sit across from me and try to locate words that weren't coming. I didn't help her find them, not out of cruelty, out of honesty, because for 7 months I had carried every word alone, and for once the silence belonged to her. The business was real. Harper had made sure of that. Juniper had structured it cleanly. 3 active contracts, a 4th in negotiation, a legitimate LLC with my name on the front of it. Not hidden, not illegal, not a trap. Just something I had built while my wife stopped seeing me. She had canceled my credit card to show me what powerlessness felt like. What she found instead was that she'd been looking at the wrong man for a very long time. We didn't speak for most of that day. That isn't as strange as it might sound. Iris and I had developed over the years a particular architecture of silence, the kind that long marriages build without either person noticing. Rooms we moved through on separate schedules, conversations that started and stopped before they reached anything real. We had become, without ever deciding to, 2 people who were very good at existing near each other without actually meeting. She spent the morning in the study. I heard her on the phone twice, once briefly, once for nearly an hour. Gabriel probably, maybe her sister in Portland. I didn't ask. I sat in the backyard for a while, reading, or pretending to read, mostly just holding a book and feeling the strange, untidy weight of a morning that had gone exactly as I'd prepared for, and still felt nothing like I'd expected. Here is something nobody tells you about quiet revenge. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like standing in a room where something has just broken and realizing you are holding the only other piece. By evening, we were at the dinner table. Iris had cooked pasta, simple, the recipe she's made 1,000 times. That surprised me. I thought she might not come down at all, but she cooked, and she set 2 plates, and we sat across from each other under the kitchen light that we always meant to replace with something warmer. We ate in silence for a while. Then Iris put her fork down. Carefully, deliberately. I stopped seeing you as my partner years ago, Harrison. She said it the way someone says something they've rehearsed alone, flat, direct, without the tremor that comes from words spoken for the first time. This wasn't new to her. This was something she'd already made peace with before she said it to me. You became furniture, she continued. I know that sounds brutal, but you were just there. Reliable the way a wall is reliable. Not a person I was building something with anymore. Just part of the house. Furniture. I sat with that word, turned it over, felt the edges of it. And here is where I surprised myself, because what rose in me wasn't rage. It wasn't the cold, structured clarity that had carried me through 7 months of quiet preparation. What rose was something older and more fragile than any of that. Something I had packed away so efficiently that I'd almost convinced myself it wasn't there anymore. It was grief. Plain and simple. The grief of a man who had loved someone completely and somewhere along the way lost the ability to make her feel it. You're right, I said. She looked up. Not about the furniture. You're not right about that. I was never just filling space, Iris, and somewhere in you, you know that. But you're right that I disappeared. I set my own fork down. I stopped fighting to be seen. I told myself it was patience or maturity or just the way long marriages settle. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid that if I pushed too hard to be heard, you'd confirm what I already suspected, that you'd stopped listening. The kitchen was very quiet. The night I sat in the driveway for 2 hours, I said. Do you know about that night? She shook her head slowly. I couldn't come inside, not because I was angry, because I didn't feel like I lived here anymore, like I was a guest in my own life. I looked at her directly. That's the night I called Harper, not to plan something against you, because I needed to feel like I existed. Something crossed Iris's face then, not guilt exactly. Something more complicated, the look of a person who has just been handed a mirror they weren't ready for. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said softly, I didn't know you felt that way. 4 words, and the entire temperature of the room changed. Because here is the thing I hadn't prepared for. hadn't built a legal framework around, hadn't discussed with Harper or Juniper or anyone the possibility that Iris might not have known. That the woman I'd cast in my darkest moments of preparation as someone who had consciously, deliberately chosen to diminish me might have simply been someone who had gotten lost, too. Someone who had stopped paying attention without realizing what she was no longer seeing. I wasn't ready to forgive her, but I was, for the first time in a long time, willing to believe she was human. We didn't resolve anything that night. There was nothing neat about the conversation that followed. It was halting and uncomfortable and honest in the way that only exhausted people manage to be. But when I finally went upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed again, I realized something had shifted. Not in the plan. The plan was still in motion, but in me. Something had cracked open that I hadn't expected, and I didn't yet know if that was weakness or the first real thing I'd felt in years. Juniper's office smelled like fresh paper and wood polish, clean, ordered, the kind of room that makes complicated things feel manageable simply by being well organized. I had been there 4 times before, always purposeful, always clear-headed, always walking in, knowing exactly what I wanted. This time felt different before I even sat down. She had the documents ready. 2 folders side by side, positioned with the quiet precision that I'd come to associate with Juniper. A woman who understood that the way you present difficult information is almost as important as the information itself. She folded her hands and looked at me the way she always did. Direct, steady, professionally warm. "Everything is clean, Harrison," she said. "You have full standing. The LLC is solid. The asset restructuring is airtight. If you want to move forward with a formal separation of finances and file for dissolution, you walk out of this marriage with everything you've built, protected, documented, and entirely yours." I looked at the folders, 40 years reduced to 2 manila folders and a pen on a mahogany table. "And the alternative?" I asked. I don't know why I asked. I already knew the alternative. Juniper had outlined it weeks ago. But something in me needed to hear it again in that room, on that day, with the weight of Iris's 4 words still sitting in my chest like a stone I hadn't decided what to do with. "The alternative," Juniper said carefully, "is a post-nuptial agreement. Full financial transparency from both sides. Equal standing. Legally binding reset, not a retreat, Harrison. A restructure. You don't lose anything you've built. You simply choose to stop building alone." I nodded slowly. Then Juniper's assistant knocked once and opened the door just enough to pass a phone through the gap. "I'm sorry to interrupt. His daughter's been trying to reach him." I took the phone. My daughter's voice came through warm and slightly breathless, the way she always sounds when she's worried but trying not to show it. She didn't know the full picture, only that something serious was happening between her parents. I had kept her at a careful distance from the details, not wanting to position her, not wanting her to carry weight that belonged to Iris and me alone. "Dad," she said, "I don't know everything that's going on, and I'm not calling to take sides, I promise. I just need you to hear me say one thing." "Go ahead," I told her. "Don't let it end ugly. Whatever she did, whatever you've done, you're both better than ugly. I've seen you be better than that my whole life." I thanked her, kept my voice even, told her I loved her, and handed the phone back. I sat for a moment looking at the 2 folders, and then the door to Juniper's office opened, not the assistant this time. Gabriel. He was standing in the doorway looking like a man who had driven somewhere impulsively and was already regretting it, coat half-buttoned, an expression caught somewhere between apology and desperation. Juniper was on her feet immediately. "Sir, this is a private—" "I know," Gabriel said quickly. "I know. 5 minutes. Please." He looked at me. "Harrison, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I told Juniper it was all right. Gabriel sat down across from me, not in Juniper's chair, in the chair beside mine, which somehow made it feel less like a confrontation and more like a confession. He was quiet for a moment, gathering himself, and then he told me something I had not expected to hear from him. He told me that the conversation Iris had with him, the one I'd overheard 7 months ago, the one about making a move, had been his fault more than hers. That Iris had come to him frustrated and exhausted and sad in the particular way of someone who doesn't know how to reach the person they're supposed to be closest to. That he had listened sympathetically at first and then pushed, encouraged, told her that decisive action was better than prolonged unhappiness. "I thought I was helping her," he said. "I was projecting. My own divorce, my own regrets, I pushed them onto your marriage, and I'm sorry, Harrison, genuinely." He told me one more thing before he left. Iris had cried the night she canceled the card, had barely slept, had told Gabriel the next morning that she wasn't sure she'd done the right thing, and that she was frightened, not triumphant, that the version of herself who canceled that card felt like someone she didn't entirely recognize. Gabriel left. Juniper said nothing, which was exactly right. I sat alone with the two folders. The pen was still on the table. I thought about the park bench, the delivery room, the driveway at 9 p.m., the dinner table, the 4 words. Then I reached forward, and I picked up the pen. I signed the postnuptial agreement, not because I was weak, not because 40 years of habit overruled 40 years of hurt. I signed it because standing in that office, pen in hand, I finally understood something that all my careful preparation, the LLC, the accounts, the legal architecture I'd quietly built around myself, had never actually taught me. Power isn't what you take from someone. It's what you no longer need them to give you. The months that followed were not a fairy tale. I want to be honest about that because you deserve honesty more than you deserve a clean ending. Iris and I moved carefully around each other like people learning to walk after an injury, to present, cautious, occasionally surprised by how much ground we could cover and how quickly the old patterns tried to pull us back. I moved into the guest bedroom. We began counseling. A woman named Dr. Reeves, quiet and perceptive, who had an ability to name the thing in the room that both people were pretending wasn't there. Some sessions left me driving home in silence. Some left Iris in tears. Some, not many, but some, ended with us walking to the car together and talking about nothing important the whole way, and that nothing feeling, somehow. Like everything, Iris admitted she had confused control with security for so long that she no longer knew where one ended and the other began. I admitted I had chosen silence over confrontation so consistently that I had made myself easy to overlook. We were not innocent people who had been wronged by circumstance. We were two people who had stopped showing up, just in different ways. The business kept growing. Harper secured 2 new contracts by spring. I flew to Chicago for an educators' conference, stood at a podium in front of 300 people, and spoke about literature and resilience and the quiet power of stories that refuse to end where you expect them to. I was terrified. I was also, for the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, completely myself. I came home to find that Iris had framed the conference program. She'd left it on my desk without a note, just the frame. Simple wood, clean glass, sitting there like a quiet statement. I see you. I see this. I see that this is real. I stood in the doorway of the study holding it for a long time. We are not repaired. I won't pretend that a postnuptial agreement and a framed program and a good therapist erases 40 years of accumulated distance. But we are honest now in a way we haven't been in decades. And honesty, I've learned, is not the end of damage. It's just the only ground solid enough to build something new on. Some evenings I sit on the back porch with my coffee. The light goes gold and then gray. The yard is quiet. And I think about the man who sat in a driveway 2 years ago, unable to go inside his own home. And I feel something for him that I can only describe as tenderness. He was lost, but he kept going. She thought canceling that card would finish me. What it actually did was remind me who I was before I let myself disappear. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not performing strength for anyone's benefit, not Iris's, not yours, not my own. I am simply a man of 63 who built something real in the dark, who stood at a dinner table and told the truth, who picked up a pen and chose the harder, more human option, and who walks back inside now every evening because the door is open, and this time it feels like mine. That's Harrison's story, all of it, and I have one question for you. Did it end the way you expected? Because if any part of this journey moved you, stayed with you, or reminded you of someone in your life, then this channel exists for exactly that reason. Subscribe right now if you haven't already. Like this video, it genuinely helps this story reach someone who needs it today. Share it with one person, just one. And drop a comment below telling me the moment this story changed for you. Was it the morning phone call, the dinner table, the pen, the framed program? I read every single comment. Everyone. Thank you for staying with Harrison until the end. The next story is already coming. And if this one meant something to you, that one will too. Don't miss it. Subscribe. The bell is right there. See you soon.